Guys, welcome back to episode number 12. I really want to get into the topic of internet censorship by major corporations today. I also want to touch on Russia and China's current relationship from an article that I found yesterday. But the first thing I want to do is show you this screenshot. NPR Public Editor. This was a tweet from October 22nd, 2020. Why haven't you seen any stories from NPR about the New York Post's Hunter Biden story? Read more in this week's newsletter. It says, we don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. And we don't want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions. So that is regarding the Hunter Biden story. Now, you can have whatever opinion you want on Hunter Biden, on the, whether or not you think he used his father being the president as a way to make money and have monetary gain, and whether or not that affects Joe Biden and it messes with his character or not. I just look at the overall idea of major internet corporations, major social media platforms being able to completely censor a story, not because the story is misinformation or because the story is false, but simply because the story might affect a candidate's chance of winning. And you've got Twitter, you've got Instagram, you've got Facebook, all these major corporations that completely hated Trump, that called him the devil, that censored this crazy October surprise on Hunter Biden that very well likely could have significantly impacted the 2020 results. A lot of those swing states, especially the Rust Belt states, were insanely close. I'm not saying if they don't censor this story that Trump wins automatically, that you can't speculate like that, but the idea that we can let these major social media platforms just pick and choose what they want under the guise of misinformation. And I'll tell you why the word misinformation is so disingenuous and so manipulative here in a second. I wanted to get to this article, How Big Tech is Strangling Your Freedom, a conversation with entrepreneur and investor David Sachs on protecting civil liberties in the digital public square. On America's credit system, this is what they asked. They said, you have been making the case better than anyone else that despite the fact we live in a liberal democracy with a Bill of Rights and a Constitution and a First Amendment, whether most Americans are aware of it or not, we also are living inside of a soft version of a social credit system. So for the people who hear this and think, that's ridiculous, this isn't China, I want you to make the case, and this is what the entrepreneur says. He says, let's start by defining what a social credit system is. A social credit system is a system that pretends to give you civil liberties and freedom. It doesn't overtly send you to the gulag for expressing dissent. Rather, it conditions the benefits of society, economic benefits, the ability to spend your money on having the correct opinions. If you don't, then your ability to participate in online platforms is diminished or curtailed entirely. That's the situation we are gradually heading towards. When did you start to see the change? This is a very important part of this conversation. He says, back then, the CEO of Twitter said that we are the free speech wing of the free speech party. That's how Silicon Valley saw itself. 10 years later, you have widespread view that Silicon Valley needs to restrict and regulate disinformation. They weaponize that word, and prevent free speech on its platform. You'd have to say that the turning point was 2016 when Trump got elected against the wishes of pretty much everyone in Silicon Valley. That was a little too much populism for them, and they saw social media as being complicit in Trump's election. So the word misinformation, it's been huge. It's been used during the pandemic. A lot of people probably remember it as being mainly used in terms of certain treatments, things like that, medically. But really, this is a wider range of topics. And the word misinformation is not based off of the idea of finding the correct information and any misinformation, just eliminating something that's not true. No, the idea of misinformation is it gives these corporations like a Twitter a broad range to where if some site like the New York Post shares an article that they don't like, they have the ability to determine that that is misinformation no matter what. And it's this weird thing. If you were to ask me what's one word to describe what the word misinformation is for the left, it's an enabler. An enabler. It enables them to ban things. You go back to January 6th with Trump banning him. They were enabled by the January 6th situation to take him off of social media. The word misinformation has turned into an enabler to where if I'm debating someone and they say something, I can just say that's misinformation. I can say you're spreading misinformation. That's exactly what they did with the Hunter Biden story. They didn't know if it was true or false. What they knew, it was a week before the election, this story was going to significantly, we do not know if it was going to significantly impact Joe Biden's chance at winning the 2020 general election, but we can speculate that it would have at least some impact. That's why they silenced it, and they called it misinformation, and they used the excuse that anything that they don't like and they want to silence, it's just misinformation. The word misinformation is an enabler for these social media platforms. And I agree with this dude when he says it turned when Trump got elected in 2016 because these major social media platforms started to think maybe we're the reason. Maybe we're the reason Donald Trump got elected. We need to be more political. We need to be more influential. We need to make people understand that Donald Trump, that the Republican Party, that whatever Silicon Valley doesn't like, they're the bad guys. They're racist. They're disgusting. CNN went on their crazy tirade. Every day Trump was in office, it was negative, 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 negative. We can't say anything positive. That is the main problem. And the word misinformation has allowed these major corporations to label. And again, it's during, the pandemic. I don't want to get into that because YouTube really doesn't like that. But it's another situation where when someone brings up something different in terms of factors, in terms of comorbidities, in terms of what they use to get better during the pandemic, they'll say, that's just misinformation. No, we don't want to spread misinformation. The word misinformation is an enabler and it's a deflect to where if they hear something that they don't like, they'll just call it misinformation. Same thing with the Hunter Biden story. They didn't know if the Hunter Biden story was true or not. They really didn't know if it was misinformation or not, but they knew that it could impact Joe Biden's chance of winning the 2020 election, and it could likely impact Donald Trump possibly winning re-election, and they couldn't have that happen. So instead of being upright, being honest, doing the American thing, allowing free speech, guys, we're so far past the idea of free speech, and I think that's really one of the things with Twitter before they realized, like before 2016, before Trump, I really think Twitter was embracing, and like YouTube, they were all embracing free speech on social media. They liked it. They've completely shifted their tune. They've gone from embracing free speech, and obviously, listen, if you make threats against people, you should be banned and suspended. We're not talking about that. We're talking politically. They don't want certain people to have a platform, and they go as far as to kind of make excuses to ban certain people, like Donald Trump saying he incited violence, which is it's unbelievable how they got Trump off of Twitter, off of all of social media. It's also funny how they all did it at the exact same time, right? Very convenient there. Donald Trump, where's Donald Trump's tweet that says he wants his supporters to go run up onto the Capitol? Half of those people weren't even Trump supporters. They got a bunch of hillbilly Trump supporters to go up there with a bunch of government agents. And obviously, this is something that is not new to government. The January 6th situation was so positive for the Democrats, And if you can't see that, you're not thinking politically. January 6th enabled the Democrats to silence Donald Trump. It's just like you go back to 1933 or 1934, Hitler bombs his own Reichstag, blames it on the communists, and all the German people turn against communism. This is what governments do, guys. It's been done before. They manipulate their people, turn them against a certain thing. Why would you not? You want it to be as bad as possible so you can just get more grip and you can say that that party is even worse and worse and worse than we thought. They're so horrible. They're terrorists. January 6th, it's horrible. They've engraved that. That's why you have people saying January 6th was worse than 9/11. You've got people saying that and being legitimately honest about it because they are so obsessed. So obsessed. There's no critical thinking. There's no thinking in general when someone says something like that. You just have an obsession. You have to. You have to ban Donald Trump off social media. You have to stop that party. And they will do whatever it takes to stop them. And now the word misinformation, I haven't heard anyone else talk about it. It's an enabler. It's an enabler for Twitter. It's an enabler for Facebook. When they don't like something, they can just say, you know what, it's misinformation and we're removing it. That's what they'll say. They don't care if it's actually true or false. This Hunter Biden thing turned out to be true. Oh, whoopsie. Now that Joe Biden got elected, whoops, we got that one wrong. Oh, that's all right. We're just going to label anything we don't like misinformation. We don't believe in the First Amendment. I agree with what this dude was saying. After the 2016 election of Trump, I was pretty young then, but there's definitely a shift to where Twitter is like, oh my God, did we help get Trump elected? Or it wasn't even like Twitter helped get Trump elected solely, but it was the idea where Twitter was like, wait, we hate Trump. Why don't we just use our platform to influence younger people to dislike Trump? Most of Twitter is young people. So why don't they just use their platform against whether, I'm just using Trump because he was the Republican, really any Republican or any Democrat or anyone you don't like. I mean, Trump makes his own social media site. I'm sure it's going to influence people against the Democrats. Trust me, I know. And if Republicans had control of Twitter, I'm sure they would be censoring Democrats like Democrats are censoring conservatives right now. It's human nature. It's why we almost need a checks and balances system in terms of our social media. And it's so important Elon Musk, or I don't know, Elon Musk, it's just someone create a new social media platform, but you got to do it the right way to where we can get normal discourse. And we have, if someone has to get banned, it goes through a Republican, a Democratic person. You go through a system to where it's not influenced. It's like, oh, you're going to ban me. Let's say I'm alt left wing and I'm on Twitter and I'm saying some crazy crap. Well, people report it and then it goes to people who are even probably more left-wing, and they're not going to, it's just like, and then if you say something you're right-wing, and it goes to people that are all left-wing, like, who are the people that are banning people off of Twitter? I would say, we will never get any numbers on it. What do they say, 95% chance they're left-wing? These Twitter employees, that's probably lowballing it. It's probably about 100. It's probably 99 to 100% chance. So that, it's just, I wanted to really touch on the idea of weaponizing the word misinformation and using it as an enabler to ban things these major companies don't like. And this dude, I think he hit the nail on the head in this interview talking about 2016, where I think if you went back to 2014, 2015, and you're on Twitter and you're listening to what they're saying and the amount of people that were getting banned, I think it's a completely different situation. 2016 happens and everything flips on its head on social media, and they become a lot more into, thinking a certain way, having a certain agenda on social media to where their beliefs, Twitter's beliefs as a company are being pushed onto people, and they're banning people, they're suspending people, they're making sure they're trying to get you to think a certain way. And I think they saw Trump get elected in 2016 and they were like, we got to rethink this. And they went from, oh yeah, free speech, whatever. Why would you not want free speech? You're a company in America, a social media company with millions of Americans on your platform, right? It almost seems kind of obvious. And then it's like, oh crap, Trump got elected. We actually have to influence this. We cannot allow all this crap. And that's kind of how it happened. We've also got another story here. China, Russia, more determined to boost ties. That's just great. Also, we've got China-U.S. ties will degrade regardless of Russia. And this article says, in many ways, it's business as usual in Washington when it comes to Beijing. The two capitals have recently squabbled over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but longer-running disputes are also still rumbling, possibly reuniting a trade war or screening U.S. investments into the People's Republic. Whatever happens in Ukraine, economic relations look set to get worse. Bashing Beijing continues to be a rare area of bipartisan agreement in Washington. I don't agree with that at all. I think there's a big population in America that wants to self-blame America for everything. And I think a perfect example of this is global warming and climate change. They want us to shill out a multi-trillion-dollar Green New Deal on climate change when China is contributing double the CO2 emissions. But oh no, it's blame America for everything. It's always America's fault. So I don't agree with there's bipartisan agreement to blame China for some of this crap. I think there is a large contingent of people in America that have this self-blame ideology to where they can't blame any other country because it'll be seen as, I don't know, racist or whatever. Everything is America's fault. America's racist. America is horrible. They're the reason climate change exists. They are the worst. They have this huge military. There's a lot of people in America that agree with that. So I don't know if I can agree. Maybe when it comes to the government, but in general population, I don't think there's bipartisan agreement that China is horrible. I think many Americans would rather bash America than China. So that could turn a trade war currently locked in a stalemate hot again. China's relations with the United States would certainly worsen if it meaningfully helped Vladimir Putin evade sanctions or assisted him militarily. But even if Beijing plays a neutral role, which they will, China is not at this point looking to help Vladimir Putin. If China wanted to alienate themselves against the West, they would invade Taiwan. They would not take the step to help Vladimir Putin and pit themselves against the entire West and hitch their wagon to Vladimir Putin. They would rather just invade Taiwan. So if China really does want to do something, it would be invading Taiwan. It would not be helping Russia. They're going to stay neutral on it because they want Russia as a future military partner for when they get fully armed up and when they're ready to take over and become the number one superpower over the United States. That's probably not going to happen until 2050. But right now, China is completely neutral. They're not doing anything. They really have no huge military agreements like the United States. That's why I've suggested the United States enact a hands-off policy in Europe if Russia gets weak enough. I would do it even if Russia doesn't get weak. But if Russia continues to get weak, Ukraine continues to hurt their military, I think you could be at the point where you enact the hands-off policy, which would entail leaving NATO and leaving Europe. And then, I mean, if NATO still wanted to exist without the United States, that's fine. I don't care. But I would really look and center my attention onto China. If you guys remember, I've said this multiple times, when NATO was created, this was a completely different time. The United States military was in a completely different situation. It was the 50s. We were dealing with Nazi Germany. You had the massive World War I happen in Europe about 30 years prior. You had World War II mainly happening in Europe. Europe was kind of the center of everything. And I guess you could say Europe is the center in terms of this war, Eastern Europe. Well, I guess you're right in terms of that. But in terms of actual threat level, the center threat level presides in the Pacific, presides right with China. And I think it would be foolish of us to keep this pact with when we created it, we were at such a completely different point in our history compared to where we are now. We need to be more proactive, understand that China's gone through a massive military buildup. Russia is not the number one threat. China is, and we need to have our military agreements reflect that. And I think being tethered to NATO and all these smaller Eastern European countries does us no good and gives the NATO agreement does the United States very little good because the United States spends so much more on the military than every other country that is involved with NATO. So the burden, no matter where the war happens, which it will very likely happen in Europe because I don't think anyone's invading Canada or the United States, the burden is always going to fall on the United States. And I do not want that burden if the United States is trying to deal with this situation with China. So I think NATO is an outdated agreement. I understand why it's in place. I understand it encourages peace. I get all that. But at the end of the day, if someone invades a smaller European country, that's what the European Union is for. Okay, America should not have to defend Europe, especially a small country in Europe. America should not have to waste reserves on Europe, especially with what China's doing. Let's adjust our military agreements to what is happening currently, not what happened 70 or 80 years ago when we created NATO because we were scared of another European Nazi Germany rising that would take over all of Europe. Maybe people are scared Russia is going to do that, but Russia can't even defeat Ukraine. Russia is struggling in Ukraine, so I'm saying let's weaken Russia more. Let's send Ukraine a bunch of crap, military supplies, money, whatever. We get them to the point where we get them so weak that they're really not a threat. I mean, again, you can't de-nuke them, but it's at the point where we could really try and get out of Europe and get out of that outdated NATO agreement and really focus on shoring up a massive military agreement with some of the Pacific states like a South Korea and like a Japan, if, you know, to combat this Chinese military expansion, their military budget, the expansion is unbelievable. So that's what I would do. That's why I would pivot from the NATO pact that the United States is currently in. You know, I just personally think the perception of Russia due to their history is greater than what Russia actually is. Like the perception of the amount of power that Russia currently has today in the year 2022, the perception of power, because we've seen the Soviet Union, we've seen Stalin, we've seen you see them on the map. Russia is huge, right? The American people think Russia is so much more powerful because the perception based on our history has been that Russia is one of the biggest powers in the world. They defeated Nazi Germany. We had a Cold War with them. It was the two superpowers, the United States and Russia. But guys, we have to shift our thinking when we see these numbers come out about military growth. And I'm seeing you are right, there are two superpowers in this world, but it's not the United States and Russia. It's the United States and China. And the United States and China right now are lapping everyone else. So why do we have an agreement in a place that's not even close to where China is? But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.